Live. We are back after a week or two hiatus. The last time I was on the show of 11 Warriors Live, I was actually with Jack Emerson, one of our assistant producers. So it's been about 3 weeks since I've been with the usual cast and characters. I'm Chase Brown, senior producer, joined by Dan Hope, our deputy editor, and Andy Anders, our reporter and lead basketball guy. He's going to be getting ready for a dual season of covering both sports here. So be looking out for his Ohio State basketball coverage in the future. But of course, this is an Ohio State football podcast at its finest and in its integrity and in its core. And Ohio State had a game against Penn State at the Horseshoe on Saturday, with Ohio State beating Penn State 38-14. Guys, this wasn't necessarily the game that we expected it to be when we entered into the season. You know, Ohio State coming into the year was the number 2 team in the country. Penn State was, depending on the ranking, either number 1 or number 2, or number 2 or number 3. But we all kind of thought that this was going to be a top 5 matchup between Ohio State and Penn State at the beginning of the year. We didn't quite get that, but we did, for the most part, get 2 quarters of entertaining action before Ohio State turned it on in the second half. Overall, what was your experience of the game covering it? And do you think that by and large, even though it maybe wasn't the game that we were supposed to get or the one that we were expecting, did it still end up being a pretty good product on the field? Dan, what would you say about the game that occurred on Saturday?
Well, let's not downplay Ohio State beating the preseason number 2 team. There's a bit of a joke there. Last week, there was a tweet going around about giving Alabama credit for beating preseason number 13 or something along those lines. South Carolina. So we got to give Ohio State credit. I mean, they beat the preseason number 2 team in Penn State. As you said, a game that, going into the year was expected to be really a clash of 2 of the country's top national championship contenders. Obviously, that kind of season has not materialized for Penn State, but it's still Penn State. I mean, it's a team that has consistently played Ohio State tough year after year after year, and this is one of the most decisive wins we've seen from Ohio State over Penn State in recent memory. And so I think another great performance by the Buckeyes, particularly in the second half, as you said. The passing game now 2 weeks in a row, we've really seen it blossom into the elite passing attack that it should be, with Julian Sayin at the controls, Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate catching those passes. And then the defense just, continues to do its thing. Held Penn State to 200 yards of total offense, only 3.3 yards per play. That's the lowest yards per play that Penn State has had in any game since 2014. So Matt Patricia's defense continues to be the best in the country. Ohio State's passing attack certainly becoming that as well. And so lots of positives to take away from that game for Ohio State yesterday.
Dan, I know that you and I had talked about, a few weeks ago with Penn State kind of going on this losing streak. Was Penn State going to give Ohio State the best game of the remaining opponents before Michigan? A 38-14 final. We had thought that maybe UCLA could contend and be a school that could give Ohio State its best matchup before the Michigan game. Then we see Indiana beat UCLA 56-6 on Big Noon Kickoff, the same broadcast team that was covering this Penn State game. Andy, let me ask you that question. Do you think of the next 3 opponents that Ohio State is going to play, that any of those opponents are going to give Ohio State maybe the same kind of matchup that Penn State did on Saturday? They're going to be playing at Purdue, then they're going to have that matchup with UCLA and one more game against Rutgers before they play Michigan in the season finale. Do we think any of those opponents are really going to give Ohio State the same test that Penn State did on Saturday?
No, I don't think that at all. I think when you look at, I know Penn State's been on this massive losing streak. I think it's winning out of Ohio State. It's the first time in this rivalry they've dominated to this extent, but it's also the first time Penn State's lost by more than 1 score this season. Penn State, sorry, I think I disconnected for a second there. But Penn State, they have kept these games close, and they still have a lot of talent on the roster. It just hasn't been properly utilized. And obviously, you're down your starting quarterback, which hurts too. which I don't think Grunkmeyer played particularly bad in this game. The defense in large part was smothering, but he made some plays and did some things. I don't think like Purdue, UCLA, Rutgers are probably 3 of the 4 worst teams in the Big Ten right now, outside of like Wisconsin. And Penn State's obviously they haven't won a Big Ten game yet, but I think when they get to softer parts of their schedule with interim head coach, with I don't know, I think you'll see them win a few matches here. Don't know about rescuing bowl eligibility at this point because they're 3-5, but I think they will win some games eventually here in Big Ten play. I don't like Rutgers and UCLA, and those teams aren't getting wins in Big Ten play unless they play bottom feeders. Now, of course, UCLA blew out Michigan State earlier in the year. It just feels like they were coasting off the momentum of that Penn State victory. And I don't think they actually have the roster or the structure in place to give Ohio State as much of a challenge as Penn State gave. That Penn State gave them a massive challenge, but I'm just not very high on where any of those teams are. And I do think there was something to what Ryan Day was saying during the week of Penn State has more talent than their record indicates, than that losing streak indicates. So that's where I stand with it. I think this was Ohio State's toughest test before the Michigan game there in April.
Well, before we get into the game at large, what we watched on Saturday between Ohio State and Penn State, I do want to give a shout out to the sponsor of 11 Warriors Live. It is brought to you by the First Bank of Central Ohio, the official bank of 11 Warriors. First Bank of Central Ohio is proud, as always, to support the business owners of Central Ohio. It is locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. First Bank of Central Ohio. Give them a visit at fbcentralohio.com. Ohio State, Penn State, again, 38-14. This game was pretty close at halftime, though there was the mark of CJ Donaldson fumbling the football on what seemed to be a controversial call. The way that it was maybe officiated came under question as to whether or not CJ Donaldson's progress had been stopped and whether or not that should have been called a fumble. It was called a fumble on the field, and once it was difficult for that officiating crew to overturn the call. But it does, those two teams go into halftime. Ohio State was leading 17-14, but then Ohio State comes out of the break, and in the final 30 minutes, they outscore Penn State 21-0 to give us that 38-14 final. The top performers in this game are pretty much the top performers that Ohio State has week in and week out. Julian Sayin continues to build on his Heisman Trophy campaign this season in a way that his efficiency stands out each time that he takes the football field. The more that they are putting on Julian Sayin's plate, it seems the more he is answering and delivering with these kinds of performances. Against Penn State, he goes 20 of 23 for 316 yards and 4 scores. Most of that damage came by passing the football to what Ryan Day and Jeremiah Smith and Julian Sayin called the 2 best wide receivers in college football, being Jeremiah and Carnell Tate. Jeremiah Smith had 6 catches, 123 yards, and 2 scores. Carnell Tate has 5 catches, 124 yards, and a touchdown. I don't know if this has been widespread to this point, but Ohio State has launched some Heisman campaigns for Julian Sayin and for Jeremiah Smith this morning. But Dan, I do want to ask you, with Julian Sayin, you had written an article before Andy did on Saturday for Ohio State's win over Penn State. You had put out there after Ohio State beat Wisconsin that Julian Sayin's Heisman campaign had started. His performance on Saturday, how much more confidence does it give you that Julian Sayin's going to be in New York in December and could hoist that stiff arm trophy?
Well, it's certainly, I think right now, Julian Sayin has put himself at the forefront of the Heisman race. He has the best odds on all the sports books that I've seen. And so I think he's done exactly what he's needed to do for these first 2 months of the season to put himself in position to not only be in contention for the Heisman Trophy, but win the Heisman Trophy. But, we all know that really this is going to come down to the Michigan game and the Big Ten championship game. Like, the next few weeks should be a good opportunity for Julian Sayin to continue to put up numbers against some lower level Big Ten teams. But ultimately, to win the Heisman, He's got to lead Ohio State to a win over Michigan, and a big game in the Big Ten championship game would also go a long way, because we've seen it, a few times in recent years. CJ Stroud, both of his years as Ohio State starting quarterback, he was very much in that Heisman race going into the Michigan game. Ohio State loses. He still goes to New York as a Heisman finalist, but losing that game to Michigan really killed his chances of actually winning the award. I mean, even last year, some Will Howard talk was starting to rise up going into that Michigan game. And then again, has a tough game against Michigan, obviously took the hit to the head. Ohio State loses, and that took him out of it. So I think Julian Sayin's doing everything that he's needed to do so far to put himself in a great position to have a chance to win a Heisman. I mean, his numbers are absurd. I mean, he's averaging still 2 months into the season over 80% of his passes. I mean, he is going to obliterate Ohio State's school record for completion percentage if he keeps doing what he's doing. And so I think he is the best quarterback in college football already. I think he should be the Heisman front runner right now. But it is, and I think this is why I think Ryan Day, when he was asked about it yesterday, kind of pumped the brakes on it a little bit of like, we got to see what happens rest of the season, because he knows, like, ultimately that Michigan game is going to carry a ton of weight. And then, you look ahead to a potential Ohio State, Indiana Big Ten championship game. The top two front runners for the Heisman right now are Julian Sayin and Fernando Mendoza. So very possible Julian Sayin and Fernando Mendoza are dueling for the Heisman Trophy in Indianapolis on the first weekend of December.
Andy, you wrote the article about Julian Sayin's Heisman campaign continuing to soar after Ohio State beat Penn State. I want to ask you about this in particular, because this seems to be the narrative maybe against Julian Sayin winning the Heisman Trophy. And it's the argument that's been used against Ohio State quarterbacks really for the past, 8 to 10 years, is that the wide receivers are always open. And the skill talent that they have at their possession to throw the football to, it really isn't that impressive that an Ohio State quarterback would put up the numbers that Julian Sayin has. Again, because they have the best wide receivers in America, because of the talent around them. What do you think about that argument? And what would you say in response to anyone who would choose to make that argument against Julian Sayin as he continues to build performances week after week in an effort to make it to New York?
Yeah, I would say anyone making that argument hasn't watched the games or is blind, maybe, or it's just not. It's not a well thought out take when you watch this man throw the football. I mean, even beyond the deep passes, which were so perfect, and the first one to Carnell was slightly underthrown. The other two, like, they didn't break stride, and they're 45 yards down the field. I mean, who does that, right? You're layering it over two defenders to Jeremiah, and it's just right here. The back shoulder ball, there was a back shoulder ball early that Sayin connected to Smith on, I believe it was on their first drive, where Jeremiah was pretty well covered. And if you don't place that ball perfectly, it's not a completion. And that's the other thing with Julian, is the ball placement has been insane. And I don't care who you are, accurate passes are accurate passes. There have been a long line of quarterbacks in the past who had the best receivers in college football. There's one every year who has the best receivers in college football. No one completes 80 passes. It's unheard of. It's a ridiculous number. And I want to point out how ridiculous of a number that is. Julian Sayin, the number 2 quarterback in the country this year, is Damon Williams Jr. at Washington. Ohio State played him. 73.1% of his completions. That's 7.6% behind Julian Sayin. Anyone have a guess as to what that gap is? If you took 7.6% down from Damon Williams Jr., what place you would arrive at on the completion percentage leaderboard for the country among quarterbacks?
I have no guess.
36.
30. The gap between one Julian and 2 Damon Williams is the same as the gap from Damon Williams to the 36th best quarterback in the country by completion percentage, CJ Carr.
Wow.
So I'm not hearing any arguments about, his receivers are just always open. Oh, no. No, dominating. He has the best passer rating in the country too, by a pretty big margin. Yards per attempt now, I believe he is. I'm looking at it. He's second. He's only behind Tommy Castellanos of Florida State. And not only that, but his footwork is exceptional and his pocket awareness is exceptional. And I think that was honestly the biggest compliment Day paid Sayin after this game in particular, was saying like he does things we don't even coach when it comes to his pocket presence and feel for the pass rush. The way he can just sense where defenders are. We saw him have a big scramble in this game on a 3rd and 5 when it was still a 3-point game in the second quarter, where Austin Arvell, who's been great at left tackle this year, but gets beat. We all have bad moments. Gets beat by Denai Dennis Sutton, who's a really talented pass rusher. And Julian sidesteps him, evades a second guy, and scrambles for 9 yards on 3rd and 5. And he didn't take any sacks in this game, despite being under pressure, I think, pretty consistently relative to how much he's been under pressure this year, especially in the first half. He has this innate ability, and he can make off-platform throws too. So it's just this lethal combo of he can escape the pocket, get on the run, I stay downfield, finding somebody open, or scrambling if that's what is required, or throwing the ball away if that is what's needed. Can't say enough about the guy. I love also the humility. Like, even I'm not going to sit here and say he fully doesn't take any credit for the way he's played, but at least in press conferences, he's going to throw it all back on his teammates, which isn't necessarily what you always like to hear as a reporter for writing stories, but it is what you like to hear as a guy who's, played football long ago, a washed up high school athlete, who's been on a team before. You like to hear that humility, willing to throw it back on your teammates. It's a sign of leadership. And I mean, you just can't say enough about the kid. He's far and away the front runner for the Heisman right now for me. And I'm with Dan. It's got to happen against Michigan in the conference championship, probably after that. But if Ohio State goes 13-0, it's just Sayins to lose at this point to me.
I thought there was an interesting article that Dalton Wasserman of Pro Football Focus put out going into this Penn State game. I've written many times in the school session that I have a love-hate relationship with Pro Football Focus. Some of their stuff I enjoy, some of their stuff I take issue of. But this in particular, I think, is a pretty interesting statistic. Maybe it's just one that fits my narrative, but that's kind of, I'm going to take it as it is. But the article that he posted was about the kind of accurate throws that Julian Sayin is throwing, because it's one thing to marvel at the overall completion percentage that Julian Sayin has each week. That is impressive in its own right. But when you start to break down how accurate the accurate throws are, you see that Julian Sayin is putting himself in an elite company. This was going into the Penn State weekend. I imagine that a 20 of 23 performance is going to help out these numbers even more. But Julian Sayin ranked second in college football in accurate plus throws at 22.5%. So about 1 out of every 4 throws that Julian Sayin has, he's putting it right on the money. You look at his accurate throws, 77.5% ranks first in the nation. Catchable, inaccurate, 8.6% first in the nation. Uncatchable, inaccurate, 13.9% ranks first in the nation. With a minimum of 150 chartable passes, only 2 quarterbacks in that span since 2018 have led the FBS in their accuracy rates in multiple of these categories. Joe Burrow in 2019 and Mac Jones in 2020. Joe Burrow obviously won the Heisman Trophy in 2019, led LSU to the national championship. Mac Jones was, I believe, a top 5 finisher for the Heisman Trophy, led his team to a national championship. Other NFL stars who were close in that category, NFL quarterback currently, Bo Nix, Brock Purdy, and CJ Stroud. Iowa State's Rocco Becht is in the percentage deemed accurate plus. He is the leader in that category. Julian Sayin, his accuracy, again, it is one thing to marvel at just the overall completion percentage, but the way that he is delivering these passes week after week to a very talented receiver core is something also to take note of. Well, let's talk about those receivers, though. It seems as if Ohio State, again, has the 2 best receivers in college football. Last year, I think you could have made that argument with Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka. It's even easier to make that argument now that you're seeing the way that Emeka Egbuka is tearing up the NFL in his rookie season. But we were talking about it off air in a conversation after the game on Saturday. Carnell Tate, and this is nothing against Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate looks like a stud this season. And Dan, that was the claim that you made, that Emeka Egbuka was great, but Carnell Tate has taken the wide receiver 2 role at Ohio State this season and brought it to an entirely new level. So what exactly in Carnell Tate's game, Dan, are you seeing at this point, 8 games into the year, that's giving him that edge over an all-time great in Emeka Egbuka?
Well, it's just every week he's doing something spectacular. I mean, you just see these tremendous catches he makes. Just his body control is phenomenal. His hands are so good. You see the route running's there. The deep speed is there. He's just someone who's really become that, big play weapon for Ohio State, and somebody who's really giving defensive backs a tough time covering down the field. And it's putting opposing secondaries in such a tough spot, because it's like pick your poison. You got Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate. It's like, how do you cover both of them and take them both out of a game when they've both proven if you man them up one-on-one, it's going to be a very hard battle for you to win. And so, I think, it's one of those things that sounds cliche, but like it really is true right now that Ohio State does have 2 wide receiver ones. I mean, Carnell Tate has become that guy. Like he's become that guy where, if you're talking about who's Jeremiah Smith's competition for the best wide receiver in football, I believe his top competition is his own teammate, Carnell Tate. And I think, that's why when you get into some of the Heisman talk, I do feel like Julian is the stronger candidate, the more likely candidate to win the Heisman Trophy. I think Jeremiah Smith is still the best player in college football. I think we saw that at times yesterday. I mean, that crazy one-handed catch he made, and what was really probably Julian's only bad throw of a day. And Jeremiah had a great quote after the game. He said, I didn't want Julian to throw an interception so he wouldn't grade out as a champion. So he had to make that play for him. And what a play it was. And you see a play like that, and it reminds you just, why everybody's calling Jeremiah Smith an alien. Like, the guy does superhuman things on a weekly basis. But Carnell, I mean, he's getting into that same stratosphere with the way that he's playing week in and week out. You're seeing the spectacular highlights, but you're also seeing the consistency. I mean, I think it's 4 of the last 6 games or something along those lines now that Carnell Tate has topped 100 receiving yards. Week in, week out, the guy's making plays. I think he's going to be a top 15 pick in next year's NFL draft. And I mean, you've got 2 wide receivers now who are firmly in the conversation for All-American honors.
Let's talk about this, because I think this is quite an entertaining question. And that is one that Ari Wasserman, friend of the program, now writes for On3, presented on social media on Saturday night. It was more so a take, but I'll ask it to you guys as a question. Does Ohio State have the 5 best players in college football? And I'm making the assumption that Ari is including within those top 5, Julian Sayin, Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Arvell, Reese, Caleb Downs. Is that the top 5 players in college football, Andy? Like, it's kind of hard to make an argument against those 5 being the best. There are definitely some other great players across college football. One name that was coming to mind when I saw Ari's tweet was, I would love to have Jeremiah Love on my football team. He is an excellent running back over at Notre Dame. Fernando Mendoza is obviously an excellent quarterback for Indiana. But you look at the top 5. Does Ohio State have them, Andy, on their roster, the top 5 players in this sport?
They just might. I mean, I'd also throw Miami's Ruben Bain in that mix. I know Miami Fritz right now, but he's a guy that is a game wrecker too. But yeah, I think there's definitely an argument out there to have. I was talking about it in our chat the other day. Like, you look at it, Ohio State right now has the favorite, I would say the favorite for 5 of the biggest awards at the end of the season. Heisman Trophy, obviously, we just talked about it with Julian and Davey O'Brien too. With that, which goes to the quarterback. Best receiver, Biletnikoff. I mean, Jeremiah and Carnell are making a case, of course. Buckus Award, best linebacker, Arvell Reese, I think has kind of cleared himself head and shoulders as the best linebacker in the country. And unlike the Heisman, where a Michigan loss would derail a lot of that because so much of it, as much as it's an individual award, is going to be based around how the team performs. I think Arvell as the Buckus is like one of the clearest picks in college football, regardless of whether the season ends the way Ohio State wants it to. And then Caleb Downs for the Thorpe, best defensive back. Like you think about how crazy it is, and this is something that Dan mentioned again in our chat, was 14 NFL draft picks leave this team and they come back the next year and have more star power at the top end. Like, I don't know if they have the depth of last year when you look at like getting down the roster beyond those guys and guys like Caden McDonald and Caden Curry, some of those other names that are also like bringing some star power at other positions. It's not a comparison of last year's team to this year's team, but that it just goes to show all the star power that is on this roster, despite what was churned through and what Ryan Day has built. The talent evaluation. I mean, Arvell Reese wasn't a 5-star either. Like the other guys were kind of can't miss prospects, I guess. Arvell was someone that they brought in and recognized the physical specimen he could be. James Laurinaitis, hell of a job in development there. You got to give a lot of credit to what he's done as a linebacker coach already. But yeah, just exceptional. And I listen, if someone wants to say that's the 5 best players in college football, I won't argue with them. And it's why Ohio State is right now ranked as the number 1 team in the country. And I think the best team in the country. Indiana might hold an argument, but that those 5 are just, you can't say enough about any of them.
You have those guys who are, I think you could argue, and I think most people would agree that they are at least among the top 10 in the sport. If they're not all collectively in the top 5, that they are at least a part of the top 10. And then you throw in some of the guys that Ohio State had listed as midseason All-Americans. You can look at any number of outlets that posted those. I think typically most people are going to agree that the AP is the one that holds the most weight. And that had Caden Curry, that had Caden McDonald. I think that you could also make an argument for the way that Jermaine Matthews Jr. and Davison Inkpenosan are playing on the outside, that they're among the 2 players that are the best at their position. You look more, I think, from across the starting lineup perspective. I think Ohio State's 11 on the defensive side of the ball probably has more guys that are at the upper echelon of the sport than the offense. And maybe that just is commentary on the offensive line and maybe some of the things that they're still working through across the 5-man at the front. But the defense is just loaded with talent. And they show continually week after week that they are one of the best defenses that we've seen around here in a long time. Dan, I know that you wrote about them after the game, and particularly just the way that Matt Patricia's defense, his scheme, the way that he's unleashing these players, they are on the ascent. And I think that was a great thing for Ohio State fans to see on Saturday, especially when given kind of the opposite side of the field. You have a Jim Knowles defense that coming into the year was expected to be one of the best in America, but is on the descent week after week. So what do we make, I guess, of the job that Matt Patricia has done, while also kind of getting the opportunity on Saturday to see, okay, Jim Knowles is now running this Penn State defense, the highest paid defensive coordinator, and they're not maybe at the level that they wanted to. They're certainly not at the level that they wanted to be at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and what Matt Patricia's done is phenomenal. I mean, the defense has been by far the best in college football so far this season. They've still allowed 55 points. Just looking at the numbers real quick, they've allowed 214.8 yards per game. That's 20 fewer than any other team. Iowa currently second in the country. They've allowed 6.9 points per game, of the only team in the country that's held opponents to single digits on average. So, I mean, what they're doing on a week in, week out basis has been phenomenal. I think Matt Patricia has done a great job of scheming up players, I think he's done a great job. You hear guys talk a lot about how he's made the defense very easy for them to understand, allowing them to play fast. I think Matt Patricia has done a great job of taking a lot of the concepts that made him a successful defensive coordinator in the NFL and then boiling them down into ways that allow Ohio State's players to be able to understand them easily and to be able to play really fast. And now the other side of that is, like they say, Jimmy's and Joe's beat X's and O's, right? So it helps that Matt Patricia has a lot of really talented, really smart football players to work with, and that all plays a lot into it because, as you said, I mean, there's a lot of studs on this defense. I mean, certainly Arvell, Reese, Caleb Downs, Caden McDonald, Caden Curry. I mean, Sonny Styles, you haven't mentioned him yet. He's also one of the best linebackers in the country. Davis Igbenos and Jermaine Matthews, as you said, two of the best cornerbacks in the country. I mean, Kenyatta Jackson, I think he had his best game of his season yesterday. I think he's starting to look like the guy that he was being hyped up to be going into the year. I haven't had a chance to rewatch the game yet, but I know like PFF graded, I think Edric Houston is the best defensive tackle in the country yesterday. And so he seems like he's starting to come into his own a little more the last couple of weeks. Jalen McClain's done really well at strong safety. Lorenzo Styles Jr. got back into the lineup yesterday. And so, it's a loaded defense. And that does make a difference in terms when you're comparing Matt Patricia and Jim Knowles. Is Matt Patricia does have more talent to work with at Ohio State right now than Jim Knowles does at Penn State. That said, that takes nothing away from how phenomenal a job Matt Patricia's done, because I think all of us thought they were probably going to take at least a small step back on defense this year. I mean, they lost 8 guys who were selected in the NFL draft. And for them to be at this point in the year playing better on defense than they were a year ago after losing 8 NFL draft picks from last year's defense, that's amazing. And on the other side of that coin, Jim Knowles, he did, while he doesn't, there's no Arvell, Reese or Caleb Downs on Penn State's defense, he still has good talent. I mean, he's got, Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant up front. They lost Tony Rojas at linebacker, which I think was a big loss, but they've got, AJ Harris, who's one of the top corners in the country, some other experienced defensive backs like Zakee Wheatley. So that defense absolutely at Penn State was supposed to be one of the best defenses in the country this year. And it hasn't been. I mean, they've allowed over 31 points per game in Big Ten play. And so huge disappointment there for Jim Knowles, who very well could be one and done at Penn State, given that James Franklin was already fired. And meanwhile, Matt Patricia looks like the best assistant coach in the country right now. And so certainly it's hard to say anything other than it seems like Ohio State upgraded at defensive coordinator. And that's an incredible thing to say because Ohio State had the best defense in the country and won a national championship a year ago.
I just want to give a quick shout out to someone in our YouTube chat. GOJ gave us a super chat. He just wanted to thank us for taking time out of our day to talk about the Buckeyes. We thank him for taking time out of his day or their day to watch this broadcast of 11 Warriors Live. We're thankful to have the platform and the opportunity to talk about the Buckeyes. One thing that I thought was really funny, Dan, I think you posted it on X on Saturday, was late in the second half. I can't quite remember if it was between the third quarter or the fourth quarter, but they were showing Matt Patricia on the scoreboard at Ohio Stadium and then quickly moving back and forth between Patricia and Jim Knowles up in the box. And the way that the crowd reacted, they played into it by cheering every time Patricia showed up on the scoreboard and booing every time Knowles showed up on the scoreboard. And it was just hilarious. I think they had the perfect execution of it, where it was something that went on and at the start was funny. Then it kind of like drained away. It's like, okay, maybe they're going to stop. And then they kept going. And then it became funny again, to where I think almost everyone, at least in the press box, was laughing along with the stadium for how entertaining it was. I do just also want to say about Matt Patricia, the way that he has unlocked this defense, I think is one of intelligence, but it's also one of relationship. Matt Patricia is someone, when Dan, Andy, and I are at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center on Wednesday nights, and we are talking to players, who are giving us their time to interview and to answer some of our questions. You can look behind you and see by the locker room door, Matt Patricia is typically one of the coaches who is still out there sitting and talking to players. It doesn't even have to be about football. It can be about just regular life stuff. And I think that he has really enjoyed that aspect of coaching at the college level, as it's not so much a business as it is the NFL, even though NIL has crept into this sport and become a mainstay of the sport. Matt Patricia just seems like he really enjoys talking to his players and building relationships with them and truly showing them that he cares about their success, both on and off the field. That even extends to some of the reporters. On Wednesday night, I was sitting there in the Woody in the entrance lobby, and Matt Patricia ends up walking out the front lobby. He's holding the plastic bag of Kroger clothes, probably had just taken a shower after practice. And he said goodbye to each of the reporters who were sitting there working on whatever. I'm cutting up clips to post on our YouTube channel. A couple of guys are writing their stories to post on Thursday night. And like, he takes the time to say goodbye to us. It's like, we work for you, man. Like we're covering your team, your program. You don't need to even acknowledge that we exist. And he still ended up taking the time to say goodbye and say to have a good night. And I just think that kind of stuff really has made a difference for this defense this season. Kind of mix in a little bit, weave in some of the Ohio State future opponents. And let's stick, I guess, to just Michigan, who had a difficult game against Purdue on Saturday night, one that maybe even Purdue could have upset them. I wasn't watching the game toward the end to know exactly how close it was going to be, but Michigan wins this one 21-16. They certainly had their struggles moving the football without Justice Haynes at the running back position. So to kind of weave in the Michigan stuff, and obviously that's what Ohio State's building toward at the end of the year. How confident are you, Andy, that Matt Patricia is going to be able to build a defensive game plan that's going to be able to shut down Bryce Underwood, Justice Haynes if he comes back, but even if he doesn't, Jordan Marshall, the backup running back who's been stepping in? How confident are you that Matt Patricia is going to be able to create a game plan like he has all season to slow down Ohio State's biggest opponent remaining on the schedule?
Yeah, I'd say very confident. Honestly, I think Bryce Underwood has very often looked like a freshman this season. Where Julian Sayin's a redshirt freshman. Obviously, there's a difference when you've been in the program a year. Hasn't had those freshman moments that Bryce Underwood has had, and not just freshman moments, but like consistent lack of there's things you can do post snap to confuse him and make him hold the ball in his pocket awareness. Julian's is yet, although he's very athletic and can scramble. He's not taken that next step into becoming a great quarterback, and that's fine, honestly. Like a freshman, if you're a freshman starting in a big program, I'm not writing off that Bryce Underwood's going to be really, really good someday for Michigan. I just don't think that day has arrived yet, and I don't have confidence that it'll arrive this year to the level it needs to be when you are facing the most intricate and talented secondary in college football right now. And emphasis on the intricate part, because that is what Matt Patricia has brought to the table. The number of things they do in disguise, the number of ways they can show coverage and jump into something else, which I just said disguise a different way, but so be it. The different fronts they show all the time on defense, bringing guys up. Arvell Reese, especially the weapon that he is, where he's going to show off the edge, or he's going to show in B gap, or he's going to be playing off ball. You never know where he's going to line up, and you never know whether he's coming or going or spying or how. Like Underwood's legs, I don't think will be a threat, because no mobile quarterback has been a threat yet against this defense because of what they have at linebacker with Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles, and the ability to mirror quarterbacks, spy quarterbacks, whichever term you want to use. I know our film guy Kyle Jones prefers the term mirroring for how they've kind of used Arvell in these ways, but like you can look at what Damon Williams Jr. did and like how he's just torn every defense apart he's played with his legs, except for Ohio State's. I'm very confident in their plan, certainly for Underwood. I wonder about some of the perimeter run stuff that Penn State found in the first half of this game that I think Ohio State cleaned up as the game went on. Perimeter run and perimeter pass stuff, really. There were some bubble screens, some quicks, some tunnels, some things they did. to attack the edges of the Ohio State defense that found them a little bit of success. Not much because they finished with 200 yards of offense in this game. It wasn't like, it was still a dominant outing from Ohio State, obviously. But you look at these little, like, you're asking me to look for cracks in the armor. I think that maybe that was something because it was sustained, actually. It wasn't, and then couldn't do it again. Kind of took Ohio State a few drives to figure it out. And they were running a lot of like student body left, student body right stuff with unique formations that Michigan, I'm sure, has in their playbook. Some of that toss crack stuff that they were getting to Allen and Singleton. But to me, I just trust the game plan, certainly for Bryce Underwood. And look, at the end of the day, Penn State still had an awful day running the football by their standards, despite some of the successes they found with that perimeter game because they couldn't do anything up the middle. And once Ohio State figured it out, which the solution was basically, hey, we're going to send Arvell and Sonny out there. Good luck blocking them with a tight end or a receiver.
Right.
Good luck with that, So that was, I have a lot of confidence in Matt Patricia to come up with a defense that stops this Michigan offense. Because and then the other thing is they just haven't looked that threatening this year. They've sputtered in multiple games like this. They did not look good last night from and obviously the score, like, not to be a box score watcher, but I have a lot of confidence in Matt Patricia having the right plan of attack. And then it just comes down to, is Ohio State willing to throw the ball 65, 70% of the time? I'll let Dan dive more into that if we want to continue talking about the Michigan game. We kind of touched on it after Carmen. But to me, my worries for the Michigan game only pertain to the offense and what Ryan Day's approach will be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
I would love to hear your insight on that.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on that, like, I agree with you. Like, I do have like a lot of confidence in Ohio State's defense versus Michigan's offense. Like, on paper, Ohio State should have a massive advantage there, but they did last year too, and they still lost the game at home. So, you can't take anything for
Wasn't the
granted.
defense's fault, though.
It was not the defense's fault.
To Jim Knowles' credit, they only allowed 13 points.
It was certainly not the defense's fault in that game. It was, offense and special teams were where Ohio State was unable to get the job done. And I agree with that, but it's just, I can't sit here and say, well, Bryce Underwood's not very good right now. They're for sure going to win because they lost to Davis Warren last year. Bryce Underwood certainly has the capability to do a lot more things than Davis Warren could do as Michigan's quarterback. And so, I do think certainly, at least on paper, like Ohio State's defense should have a big advantage over Michigan's offense, particularly in the passing game. I do think Michigan's running games, when Justice Haynes is healthy, is one of the best rushing offenses in the country. So I do think that Michigan can test Ohio State's defensive front in that way. We did see a couple times yesterday where Penn State was able to get some things growing on the ground. I don't know that we can really say Ohio State's faced a lot of like great running teams yet. So I do think Michigan is probably going to be the biggest test of the regular season in terms of run defense for Ohio State and Matt Patricia's unit. I think, the passing game is certainly still a work in progress for Michigan, and Bryce Underwood's going to need to improve a lot over the next 4 weeks for Michigan to get to where it needs to be in that regard. But I do think that, assuming Justice Haynes is back and healthy and able to play, I do think that running game can be a test for Ohio State's defense that maybe we haven't seen a whole lot of from other opponents so far. But, going back to your point about, Ohio State's offense, I do think, they need to look at what's worked the last couple of weeks, and they really need to be willing to lean on and commit to that passing game. You have the best quarterback in the country right now. You have the two best wide receivers in the country right now. Your game plan needs to be built around those guys. You can't go into that game so hyper focused on whoever wins the rushing battle wins the game. Because here's the reality. Michigan, if you're comparing these teams, I was like, the one area where Michigan is better than Ohio State right now is their running game. Their rushing offense is better than Ohio State's rushing offense. That's been Ohio State's weakness. So Ohio State can't play into that. They can't. I think what's what they did last year is they got too focused on like we have to win the running battle to win the game. So they put too much focus on that and played away from their strengths in every other area. The Steers team is a similar team. You've got the best defense in the country again. You've got you still got the best receiver in the country. You got this dynamic passing attack. The one weakness for Ohio State, though, has been the running game. It has not gotten to the level that it should be yet. And Ohio State needs to work on that a lot the next few weeks but before, it plays Michigan, because, it is November. You never know what the weather is going to be like. So that it's improving on the running game has to be a huge point of emphasis the next few weeks. But when you go up to Ann Arbor on November 29, you have to play to your strengths. And those strengths certainly are the passing attack on offense and then just the defense as a whole.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I didn't really consider, because that was something I wrote about in a school session last year, was that, whoever wins the rushing battle, whoever wins the running game wins the game. But here's the reality. If you get up by 4 scores against Michigan, you're probably going to win the rushing battle. I think about a few years ago when Ohio State played Michigan State at home and they blitzed them I can't even remember what the score was at halftime. CJ Stroud had 5 touchdown passes. Chris Olave had 2 catches. Garrett Wilson had 2 catches, 2 touchdowns. And they were up 49-7. And Kenneth Walker was somebody who had a Heisman Trophy campaign at that point. Kenneth Walker finished with under 50 rushing yards because Michigan State simply couldn't run the ball anymore. They had to throw the ball to stay in the game. I'm even thinking recently, Thursday night, I'm watching the Baltimore Ravens play the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins don't have a great offense, but Baltimore goes up 28-6 in that game. Derrick Henry takes over the entire second half of the fourth quarter, and Baltimore ends up winning the rushing battle. Because just by nature, you end up with your lead being able to run the football, to drain the clock, and be able to just kind of ice away your win. And I think that's something that if Ohio State can overcome that maybe temptation to try and win the rushing battle early, then they'll probably end up winning the rushing battle late. And Dan, I do want to weave one last thing back to the Penn State game, because this was a question that came up a lot in our chat and in our forum posts, was that Ohio State came out in the second half with a game plan that I think people are excited about Ohio State potentially using against Michigan on November 29th. And that was, if you look at the drive charts for Ohio State in the second half, they come out and they score in 2 minutes and 42 seconds, 5 plays, 75 yards. The next drive, they get the football. Actually, let me include the defense on that next, on the following possession, because they limit Penn State to 16 yards on 7 plays. They then get the ball back again. Ohio State does. They go 7 plays, 84 yards, 4.5 minutes, and they score a touchdown. There was kind of an interesting drive on the following possession. Ohio State's defense did its job, 6 plays and 2 yards for the Penn State offense. Ohio State had a weird possession that I honestly could kind of wipe from my memory a little bit, where they had 4 plays and 17 yards and they end up punting. It was their only punt of the game. But they seemingly were also displeased with the way that drive went, because the following possession, they go 2 plays, 62 yards, and they score a touchdown. So Ohio State played to its strengths in the second half against Penn State, leaning on the defense that's been elite all season, but also airing it out on a Penn State defense that they knew they could take advantage of through the air. And they end up outscoring the Nittany Lions 21-0 to win the game. So is that the recipe that you're looking for against Michigan? Is that what you're looking to see? Is Ohio State lean on the passing attack? I would say yes. Andy, what would you say about that philosophy? Do you go into the game with this mindset of, we're going to throw it and we are going to score quickly, even if we don't have the time of possession, maybe even if we aren't leading the rushing battle early? Is that the recipe for success for Ohio State? Because I think it is. It has to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely think it is. I mean, it's kind of what I said on After Carmen and hinted at earlier. It's like, if you got to throw the ball 65, 70% of the time to win, that's what you've got to do. And it was interesting. I was watching a study the other night by Michael McElvey, who's a sports YouTuber, makes a lot of data-driven content and cool documentaries and things. He showed the dichotomy of how, like, passing the ball is almost twice as efficient in the NFL as running the ball, but it's still best mathematically to run the ball more than you throw the ball because of how different defensive coordinators will call the game, knowing that the passing game is more effective and how many pass defenses you're going to see. That's not the case in college when you have this much talent, this much of a talent gap to me. When you have the best quarterback and the best receiver and the best receiver in the country, um, and the success, like how efficient Ohio State has been these past 2 games, relying on the passing game as heavily as they have. Wisconsin, Penn State, you have 2 data points now where you just completely invested in the passing game, and the running game was a change of pace, a complement, something you threw in a little more, where the passing game was the base of your offense. Um, that, like, you have evidence to show you can go all in on the passing game, even against a team like Penn State, who their pass defense is much better than their run defense. Top 5 pass defense in the country coming into this game, and their run defense was, I think, outside the top 90. And yet you still stay pot committed to the pass, and that's what wins you the game going away like this. So I think that's what the game plan has to be is relying on the thing that got you there with the passing game, because you have so much talent. You can come out and say, yeah, it's coming, try and stop it, man. Like, try and stop Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate with whatever secondary you have. We've done it against all of them, and what we have on offense, if you're Ohio State saying this, what we have on offense is just superior to anything you can throw at us. And we have the perfect quarterback to make the show run. So, yeah, you got to be willing to throw the ball 70% if that's what it takes in the game, and put aside any toughness narratives. And the last point I'll make about this is that I think this was a key lesson that Ryan learned off of last year's Michigan loss. Because, yes, he's always, as a lot of head coaches are, like, out to win. But really, I think there were definitely past years where narratives got in his head about the toughness thing, about the run game thing, about winning the game way. And you can try to build to win a certain way, but then you have to be willing to rely on the thing that actually is going to win, right? And not worry about proving any narratives, only doing what it takes. And I really think he's shown that first in the college football playoff, and how they adjusted their game plans to just assault Oregon through the air, do like the dominance they showed and playing the way they needed to play to win that 2024 title. And then you come into this year, I wrote a column about this earlier in the season of, you look at the Texas game, you look at the Washington game, they weren't the most stylistically, aesthetically pleasing things to watch necessarily, but they didn't care about that. Running the ball and relying on the defense with a young quarterback in those settings was the right call when you have a defense this good, and you have a defense this good. And now, as it's opened up throughout the year, as Julian's got more experience and shown he's probably the best quarterback in the country, they've been willing to pass him, and they don't need to establish the run as much anymore. So to me, I think it's a key lesson that Ryan has learned. Now, will it still be a mental hurdle for him come Michigan time? I'd like to think not. I'd like to think he's willing now. He's learned his lesson now and won't play right into Michigan's hands by trying to win the rushing battle. But the true test of it will come when they actually meet at Ann Arbor. So, yeah, that's where I'm at with it. And to say I was very confident in Matt Patricia's defense earlier was not a sentiment that I'm very confident about Ohio State going to Ann Arbor and winning that game comfortably in any sort of way. I am still quite nervous about that game as it pertains to Ohio State, because how can't you be after the last 4 years?
Right.
But I am confident the defense will at least keep them in the game. And if they don't, if they just come out with the right offensive game plan, a good offensive game plan, that is where you can win this game and even win it comfortably potentially. But I'm not confident that happens. I want to emphasize that too.
Dan, I got a question for you. Actually, a lot of people do. What should Ohio State's running back depth chart be? It seems to be a question a lot of people are asking coming out of the game on Saturday. Of course, C.J. Donaldson's fumble is at the front of people's minds. James Peoples is somebody that's also at the front of others' minds when you consider that those were the two top running backs for Ohio State coming into the year. But now we have Bo Jackson and then Isaiah West in the mix. What should Ohio State's running back depth chart be? And what, I guess, are you looking to see out of the running back room in these next 3 weeks leading up to Michigan?
Yeah, I think it should be Bo Jackson number 1 and Isaiah West number 2. Now, Isaiah West, it's still a small sample size with him. He only had 4 carries yesterday. He basically played a lot on the second drive, and then he didn't play a whole lot for the rest of the game. So there's still more to be proven for Isaiah West, but I think these next 3 weeks would be a great opportunity to get Isaiah West more touches, try to build some more rhythm with him before the Michigan game, before the postseason, because I think just as a runner, I think it's been apparent the last couple of games. I mean, for Bo, it's been apparent since the first time he played. For Isaiah, it's been apparent the last couple of weeks as he started to get in there more. They offer more as a runner than C.J. Donaldson and James Peoples do. They just do. I think Bo is clearly RB1 at this point. I mean, that's measured out by the carries yesterday. He had 13 carries. No Overback had more than 7. And so I think Bo is clearly RB1 at this point. I think Ohio State has committed to that. Now the question is, will they commit to Isaiah West as RB2? Because, CJ Donaldson, he continues to be that guy they lean on in a lot of those short yardage situations. I think it's been a mixed bag there. We saw some good runs there. We've also seen some times where, he's getting stuffed for no gain, or, obviously there was the fumble yesterday. I think with James Peoples, in my opinion, it's gotten too predictable when he's in the game. Like, one series I did not like yesterday with the offense was they're in the red zone, 2nd and 3rd down and goal. You have James Peoples in the game on both those plays. We're all like, they're going to pass the ball. He's in there to pass protect. It made it too predictable for the Penn State defense that you were going to pass the ball in those situations, and you end up kicking a field goal. So I do feel like, in my mind, the goal of the next few weeks should be to try to get Isaiah West into a rhythm, get comfortable with him to where he can be your second option at running back. Because, I think the big thing that I notice is like, the running game struggles are not just on the running backs. The offensive line, I don't think had a great day yesterday, particularly in the first half. I think there's some work that needs to happen up front in terms of a run blocking. But I think the difference that I notice is Bo, and we've seen it a little bit with Isaiah too, they can make some plays when the blocking's not good, when the hole doesn't open up the way it's supposed to. Those guys can create something out of nothing. With CJ and James, it's like, if the hole doesn't open up the way it's supposed to, they just get stopped. Like, I just don't think that either of them has shown that burst, that wiggle, that extra gear that you need to kind of create something out of nothing in those situations where the run isn't blocked properly. So I think, because of that, I think Bo and Isaiah give Ohio State more in the running game. Bo is certainly RB1 right now. It now becomes a question of, will they commit to Isaiah more? Will he get more opportunities the next few weeks? And if he takes advantage of them, will they commit to him as RB2?
I don't know. I don't mean to put you on the spot here if you've made progress on your snap counts. But a lot of people are commenting that James Peoples was the focal point of that one drive in the second half that seemingly stalled. I can't confirm if that's the case. I don't know if you guys remember that drive in particular. As I said, it's kind of gone. It's gone out of my mind. It was such a blur. The 4 plays went by so quickly.
It was essentially 4 straight plays. They gave it to James where he had a nice 6-yard run. They threw it to him. Or actually, no, he had it. It was like a first down run to start. He had like an 11 or 12-yard run. Then he had a 3-yard run. Then they caught a pass for like 3 yards, and then he got stuffed.
To be fair, they did bring Isaiah West in on 3rd down on that carry. He got stopped for no gain on 3rd and 4. So to be fair, it was not all on James.
Yeah.
It was not James. It was not all James. And honestly, I thought I didn't see anything that drive that was like bad from James either.
Sure.
It
seems like they want to keep giving him opportunities. And I'm sure he'll get some over the next 3 weeks when they're playing these.
And like talk about if they want to use him in passing situations, which I think he is one of their better backs in the passing game, he has to get going as a runner. I think they're still trying to kind of work through, can they get him going as a runner? Because if they can, I think he does add value in the passing game, but it can't be a situation. Ryan Day said this himself. It can't be a situation where defenses know what you're going to do based on which running back is in the game. So everybody has to be able to do everything. And I think with James right now, at least from my vantage point, it's been a little bit too much of a heavy lean, at least when the game is close. We've seen James, Minnesota game, he comes in late, has a good drive. But when the game is close and competitive, most of the time he's in there passing the ball. So, I think he's either going to have to make strides as a runner, or other guys are going to have to make strides in the passing game, because you don't want to have it so defenses know, hey, this guy's in the game, they're gonna pass or they're gonna run.
Yeah, and one of the it was one of the earlier drives in the game that led to a touchdown. I believe it was Jeremiah Smith's first. It was actually the opening drive of the game. 11 plays, 89 yards, where Ohio State was doing some really fun stuff on offense. It seemed like they were really opening up the playbook in terms of formation. Where again, I would have to look at the snap counts, but I would believe that they had multiple running backs on the field at the time, or at least they were bringing in wide receivers to the backfield. They had multiple guys surrounding Julian Sayin. But I do agree that to continue expanding the playbook, I think looks like that. It looks like bringing out some new formations, some things that they haven't put on film, but it also just means being more versatile, because that was a comment you made during the game, Dan, yesterday or on Saturday, was that Ohio State just becomes a little bit too predictable when you have CJ Donaldson in the game and you have James Peoples in the game, because typically speaking, CJ Donaldson is in there to run for those short yardage situations. And when James Peoples is in the game, he's one of Ohio State's best pass blockers. He might be the best pass blocker out of the backfield for Ohio State at the given moment. And he also is one of the better pass catchers. So it just maybe puts them in a position where it just becomes too predictable with those guys on the field. So maybe you're able to explore some ways to expand the offense to make it so when they step onto the field, a defense doesn't exactly know what's coming. I think that will probably do it. We have a few more comments coming in, largely just conversation happening in the chat right now, both on Facebook and YouTube. We want to thank you all for sticking around in the chat and hanging out with us for an hour talking about some Ohio State football. We will be back again next week as Ohio State takes on Purdue in West Lafayette. A weird kickoff time, 1 p.m. We're still trying to maybe figure out why this game's not kicking off at noon. Maybe it's going at 1 o'clock. Who knows? The Big Ten gets to do whatever it wants with this media rights deal. But that'll do it for us on another episode of 11 Warriors Live. Want to give our sponsor another shout out, First Bank of Central Ohio, the official bank of 11 Warriors. Visit them at fbcentralohio.com. As always, I'm Chase Brown, senior producer, joined by Dan Hope, deputy editor, and Andy Anders, our lead reporter. We will talk to you guys soon on another episode of 11 Warriors Live.